I'll start off by saying a couple of things. One is thank you to the organisers for the opportunity to speak. The other thing I'd like to apologise for is my very clickbaity title. I went on holiday and I had a very sensible title, and when I came back it was very clickbaity, so apologies for that, but I've got 20 slides and you won't believe what's on slide 6. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about data strategy, and I'm also going to talk about why sometimes, and very often I would say, you actually don't need a data strategy. And in these situations, what do you need instead, and what can you do instead, and so on. So you can probably see my name is Richard Pugh. I'm Chief Data Scientist at a company called Ascent, but I also lead the data consulting team at Ascent, and that's kind of, so a lot of my work is with clients, understanding what's the right thing to do, creating data strategies and so on. I'll give you a bit of the backstory. But let me start off with a very simple hypothesis. If someone asks you for a data strategy, sometimes that's actually not what they need. I think this happens all the time. I remember a period of time between maybe 2013 and 2016 where it doesn't really matter what the question is. The answer is, let's build a data lake. Do you remember those times? You know, I remember those times, right? I think there's a sense sometimes that we must build a data strategy, right? You've got a company without a data strategy. Oh, how are they even surviving today, right? So I think there's this kind of rush, if you like, but I think very often it's not actually what people need. And so I want to kind of explore this in terms of, well, what sort of questions might lead you to a situation where you do want to create a data strategy, and when something else might be more appropriate, basically. I want to kind of explore that. So just a bit of backstory, really, a bit about me. So I'm a trained data scientist and statistician. I founded a company called Mango Solutions many years ago, which was a data science consultancy. I became more of an advisor, so less code, more PowerPoint, essentially. So advising business leaders on what's the right thing to start with, what does this thing all mean anyway, and obviously, you know, kind of building data strategies as well. And then a couple of years ago, my company, Mango, was bought by this company called Ascent. And it's interesting, when we were bought by Ascent was a pure play software company, right? All they did was software. And when they acquired my company and a few other companies, suddenly we had like software and data science and data engineering and BI and all this kind of cool stuff, right? And this caused a problem, it seems, which is when Ascent did software, the conversation was relatively simple, right? A customer would say, please, could you build me a piece of software that does this thing? Could you build me a billing system? Could you integrate X with Y? And the answer was usually, yeah, sure. And after a bit of design and UX, you start writing code, right? And this was kind of like how it was a really nice conversation. It's very easy because, of course, your user, if you like, your business person, they understand software, right? They get it. It's been around for years. Where I'm using software now. We've got apps on phones. We've got bank systems, you know, you name it, right? So people get what software can do and what the limitations are, therefore they can ask you a good question. The challenge is, as soon as you actually add in data and platform and digital and so on, the conversation becomes a bit weird. So the conversation might end up being something a bit more like, hey, could you help me make, you know, more value from data? We should be doing more with our data. How can you help me with that? And the journey from that conversation to, hey, let's write a bit of code, is not clear, right? You can't just go from, oh, you want to be more data driven? Just open up my IDE and start coding. I'll nail that for you by tomorrow, right? It doesn't work like that. And so what we wanted to do is explore this kind of the set of questions and the starting points and where you want to end up. And so in order to solve this for Ascent, what we did is created the data consulting team, which I lead. We've got a great team, really kind of diverse team of people, which is great. And we spend a lot of our time helping organizations understand, you know, what is their opportunity with data and so on. So that's kind of where I live, if you like. So, yeah, like I say, less code, more PowerPoint these days. In terms of us as a team, we believe great consulting is basically about two things. It's helping people answer the right questions. So, you know, what should we do with data? Do we need to invest in X? What should we do next? Do we want to become a different type of company? Is that what we need to do, right? So it's finding the right questions and helping them answer them. And I think another thing that is, you know, that great consulting is about is trying to understand what is the right conversation you're trying to make happen, right? How do I create a brilliant environment for the right conversation to happen about the future or about investment or about direction and so on? So that's really for us what great consulting is about. It's about nailing the questions, helping people find the answers using whatever means there's most appropriate, and creating that really great environment so they can have the right discussion. That's basically what I think consulting's about. Okay, so my talk today is all about when do you build a data strategy and when it's not the right thing to do. Okay, so before I cover that, I want to just talk to you about what I think a data strategy is, just so you know where I'm coming from. So for me, a data strategy is something that creates clarity, right? It just creates a really clear narrative around the use of data or the role of data in your future success, right? Now, every organization in the world is using data today. Therefore, this is not something new. This is not something, completely different. It's just like, how do you actually position data in a way that it can drive the outcomes we're looking to achieve, right? And that's what data strategy is about and what it should do. And it does that for me by answering two questions. What is your opportunity with data? So what could the future look like? Where can you get the value, right? What could you do with data? And then answering questions about the journey. So where are we starting from? Where are we trying to get to? What are going to be the bumps in the road? What do we need to fix first? How long is it going to take? And so on. So really simply, data strategy is about creating a clear narrative, typically for the rest of the business, right? So we can all kind of understand what we're trying to do, and then answering questions about your opportunity and your journey. And so you can kind of see on the right, I'm not sure if you can see it very well, but the structure of our data strategy is about how you align your vision for data through to your business objectives, and how that then trickles down into all the things that you actually need to do to transform to become a different type of company. Okay, so that's what data strategy is for us. And so in terms of when we are talking about needing a data strategy, right, we generally help, I would say, kind of two categories of client, right? We have clients that have a data leader, and we have clients that do not have a data leader, okay? And by data leader, I mean head of data, a chief data officer, someone who's passionate about data and knowledgeable, right? It's someone who can advise about, how or the role of data in your future success. Now, we do help people who have got data leaders. We work for like CDOs to give them a bit more diversity of perspective, sanity check things, and so on. But I thought today I would talk about the organizations that do not have a data leader. So, and I'm talking about that because of two reasons, I suppose. One is this is a really growing area. So organizations like insurers, banks, pharmaceutical companies, and so on, have been using data for years. And so actually, most of those organizations have a relatively mature data strategy, data approach, let's say. They have people who can advise and so on. But there's a growing trend around organizations that have never done the data thing before, if you like, but they get it. They get that data is important. I'm talking about organizations that will say things like, I get that data is really important to our future success, but it's the next sentence that's hard. It's like, and that means blank, right? And I think there's a growing number of companies who are in that space, and that's kind of who I've been working with a lot recently. The other reason I thought I'd concentrate on these areas is that if you are the data leader, if you are you're passionate about data in your organizations, this might be what the rest of the organization feels like, right? They come to you going, we need to do more with data, or we need a data strategy, or I've read a blog post on AI, or whatever it is, and you're having those conversations. So you're almost like the internal consultant at that point. Okay, so what I thought I would go through is the sort of variety of the questions that can be asked, of someone about data. When a data strategy might be the right thing to consider, and therefore when not, and if it's not, what else could we do, right? How do we actually help people answer questions if it's not a data strategy? So these are all, I hope you can read this, I'll read some of them out. These are all real life questions that I've been asked by people in organizations that don't have a data leader, let's say, over the last year, okay? And what you can kind of see initially is there's a real range, right? In that first conversation, right? And I'll read some of them out. So it spans from things like, hey, should we be doing more with AI, right? What are other organizations doing with data? Should we be doing stuff? Is that what we need to be doing? we just want to have a conversation about what data is. Is that something that we can do? And so there's those kind of conversations. Then you get questions like, how can we do this specific thing with data? How can I use data to drive retention or create uplift or upsell and so on? It's the, how do I apply data to this specific area that I want to focus on and add value from? And there's also then the questions that are more about, well, how do we use data to become a different type of company, right? How do we evolve using data? And so these are all obviously very, very different questions. And by the way, I've been in, meetings with stakeholders where almost all of these questions get asked at the same time, right? You might have been in meetings where there's lots of business stakeholders and one person's going, I think we should do AI. Another person's going, I think we do data brilliantly anyway. So we're already data driven, right? We do it great. Another person's going, yeah, but our quality's rubbish. You can't do that. Another person's going, I literally had a guy once in a boardroom say, this is all great, but no computer's going to ever tell me what to do, which I thought was brilliant. He's going to be ruined when the robots take over, I think. But I guess what I'm saying is there is a variety of questions, a variety of starting point, and to take each of these questions and then jump to, hey, what you want is a data strategy is probably the wrong thing to do. Okay. So the way we've been kind of thinking through some of this is we've tried to think about, well, what's the fundamental question that these things are actually leading towards, and therefore, for us, there's kind of usually three, if not starting points, like lead themes in what we're trying to do. And those are education, right? So personally, and come and chat to me about this afterwards, I think the worst thing you can do to a business stakeholder is say, what do you want from data? It's an unfair question because you understand what's possible with data and they understand their business. Therefore, just saying, hey, what do you want from data is going to lead you to a point where either you've curtailed your imagination of what you can do, or they just get frustrated, or probably more likely what happens a lot, I think, is they start trying to give you the answer that they think that you want to hear from them, right? Oh, we want a dashboard that does X. Great, right? So I think that idea of educating and giving people a language and helping them understand what data can do and where you could get to is really important. So education's a big theme and a big lead theme. The second thing we try and focus on is ideation. So that is really, questions that lead to a point where you want to add value with data, but you don't want to necessarily become a different type of company yet, right? So we think there's value to be had. We think there's things we can do. What are those things? And we're not committing yet to like some broad transformation, but this might be like the proof of the pudding, right? This might be like the thing that builds the momentum. So we've actually created tactical value, we've solved some pain points, and then later on that will inspire us to actually transform, right? Or you might have conversations about how to become a different type of company, and that really kind of feels more like a strategy project, right? It's more like, well, where are you today? Why are you trying to become a different type of company? What do you think will good look like when you get there, and everything in between, right? So I guess just to start off, there are many, many questions that lead you to different places, and it doesn't have to be a data strategy, I believe. We also get asked this question. Now, you've got to remember that these are companies that do not have a data leader, a senior, experienced data head in place. But I am still asked very often by business leaders, will you help us create a data strategy, right? And I think it's a brilliant moment because I think it's the most fascinating moment in the world because I turn around and go, yeah, sure. Why? What do you think? What do you think that it is, and what do you think? I mean, it won't be that awful in language, right? But why are you asking that question? What do you think it solves for you? And therefore, I think if you're at a point where someone in the business really wants a data strategy, I think it's a lovely opener to ask simple questions like, what do you think that will enable you to do that you can't do today? Right, so imagine we fast forward, I give you the data strategy, what have I just enabled you to actually do that you can't do now, right? That's a really good question. Or even, if I create an amazing data strategy, what does that look and feel like to you? What do you think is in that, and so on? And I think if you ask some of these open questions, I think very often you actually get back to something that isn't a strategy. Actually, we're just looking to like explore some tactile value creation, or I keep being asked about like data quality, and I actually don't know how to answer it because that's just a cost, but I don't know what's on the other side of the ROI calculation, right? So I think that asking good questions around this is really, really important. So just to be clear, and I'll go through these one at a time. I feel that you do not need a data strategy, or at least you're not ready for a data strategy if. Number one, your business strategy is not clear. I have often been asked to create a data strategy in the absence of a business strategy, and it's very, very hard, even to a point where people want me to create almost kind of reverse engineer a business strategy from a data strategy, which is, don't go there, right? That's a dark place, right? So I think that if you don't know what you want to be as an organization and probably more importantly, what you believe in and what your purpose is, it's very hard to structure a data strategy, because ultimately it's got to deliver on this stuff, right? So I think that's the first thing, is that if the business strategy is not clear, you're probably not ready to start down the journey of a data strategy, because at best what you're going to do is create something that is, hey, you could do all these things, but if you don't know what's important, it's going to fall flat, right? I think you can challenge a business strategy with a data strategy. I think very often I've done that successfully, but I think that, objectives and purpose has to be clear first, right? The next thing is, we are not ready or seeking to change. One of the phrases I get, and it's interesting, I've seen this quite a lot, where you have business strategies, and on one of the business objectives, and you might have seen this before, is a statement that will say something like, oh, we want to achieve all these business objectives and we want to be a data-driven company at the bottom. And you go, that's really fascinating that you've got that there. Because if you take the word data and everything else on the buzzwords out of it, that question basically says, we want to be a different type of company than we are today, right? So you're going, so great. If that's what you want, that is amazing. That's great. But that is about transformation. That's about changing, right? That's about going on a journey where you change your business model, or you change the way you think about data and so on, right? So that kind of journey is all about change, really. And I would argue that success of data is way more about culture and change than it is about code and algorithms, right? Speaking from someone who's going to be on a data science panel later, that's the reality, right? We know that. The next thing is, you're not looking to invest time or money in any sort of transformation. I've seen situations where people want a data strategy because they feel they should have one, a bit, right? And I've seen organizations that kind of collect strategies almost, right? And it's like, well, we need to have a data strategy in place because we haven't got one today. But it's like, well, are you actually going to, what are you going to do again with that strategy once you've got it? If the answer is, well, not a lot, then it feels to me like save your money, do something else potentially, right? I had a good conversation a little while ago with a company who said, we want to become an insight-led company. I thought, good phrase, I like the phrase, I like insight, good word. And I said, great, have you got a budget set aside for this? Because they were a very subjectively driven company at the time. And they said, yeah, we could probably justify maybe half an FTE next year for this. And I basically went, don't. If that's the level, I just don't think you're going to get any value that way. Do something tactical, maybe, but don't try and transform, right? The last one's probably the most contentious point. I would not seek to create a data strategy if your strategy landscape is cluttered. What do I mean by that? I basically mean two things. I've seen organizations and leadership teams who suffer from sort of strategy lethargy, if that's a phrase, right? It's like they've got so many strategies and the last one they created didn't actually do anything, right? And so this is a really hard space. But probably more contentious is I often work in areas where they want a data strategy, but there is already a strong digital strategy. Now, the challenge you have with this is if you're a practitioner here today, probably we can draw a line quite neatly between digital and data, right? We could do that as practitioners, right? We understand the ongoing digitalization of the world generates data that helps us to be more refined in our digitalization and transformation and so on. We get the interplay there, right? But I interviewed a CEO recently, and all the way through the meeting, he just used the word data and digital interchangeably. Same word, right? All the way through the conversation, because he was talking about value and what he wants to become and the type of organization they want. And so unconsciously, he was just swapping the words in and out, right? And so this, for me, is an interesting point where if a business has a really solid and bought into digital strategy, creating a data strategy that maybe in some way doesn't align to it is just going to confuse people, because people can see those as the same thing. So I would say that if you've got a strong digital strategy, but it doesn't cover data, but it's a good mechanism and vehicle, that's a good place to actually think about data impact, as opposed to doing some sort of separate thing, right? So I think that's kind of an area to look at as well. So those are the kind of things that I kind of, I kind of believe in terms of the data strategy and when it's right and when it's not. Thank you. I thought I would kind of just kind of finish off by talking a bit about, well, what else can we do, right? So if it's not a data strategy, what should we be doing? I think a lot of that comes back to that ideation, education, strategy conversation. It's like, are you looking to understand something better? Are you looking to find tactical value? Or are you looking to become a different thing, right? And I think you can get to those conversations by asking good open questions, and you can get to a good space. So a lot of my time is spent essentially in boardrooms talking about, well, what does the word data mean? What does it mean for you as an organization? You know, how can we get there? What's your opportunity? What are your competitors doing? Can we see some inspiring use cases and so on? I spend a lot of my time in those areas. I'm also, by the way, aware that all of you could stand in your boardrooms and say the same thing. But sometimes, you know, when it's like an external person says it and that's somehow different to, I do a lot of that kind of moment, right, essentially. But I think education is a big, big part of actually just enabling people to have the conversation, right? Ideation is really, really good if you want to find some value, right? For me, one of the biggest pitfalls in data is you brilliantly solve the wrong problem. And you've probably got endless examples in your teams of, oh, we did this thing and it didn't land because it wasn't quite the right question, or the person didn't adopt it, or, you know. And so I think that, you know, for me, it's about finding the exact right question, which means it's going to impact, it's going to add value, it's right time, right place, etc. But also, you've got the data, you can deliver this thing, the person's going to change. You know, I was talking earlier about a project I did once where the data science team wanted to do a project in an insurance company. And before we started, someone checked and realized in order to actually roll the project out, you would need to change the phone system, which would cost about 6 million quid. Now, silly example, but easy to happen, right? Where you do this stuff and then you go, oh, it's never going to land. So, you know, find the exact right thing to start with, or look at strategy. And I think I'll just kind of leave you with one last thing, which is, I think the answers to the questions, if you can ask good questions, I think very often the answers are in creating what you would traditionally call components of a strategy. So instead of creating a full data strategy, let's say, I think there are things you can create that will actually add value. And the thing I like about this is those are then kind of building blocks to actually finding, you know, to actually a full strategy later, right? So I'll give you two examples of that. One is, one of our customers at the moment is BREWDOG, really, really cool company to work for. You know, if you want, we're actually giving away BREWDOG beer on the stand. I don't have this many cans of beer, but I have some. If you want to come and see us, we're by the AI and ML Ops Theatre over there. BREWDOG was an interesting situation because they're a very entrepreneurial organization, really kind of passionate about beer. And so what you found was there was just like activity everywhere. Like you go in a room and there's 50 projects ongoing. You're like, wow, this is amazing. The energy is superb. The challenge they had was there's no agreed structure as to what all that investment is going to drive, right? So actually, how do we create, in this case, we created something called a digital North Star. But in terms of data strategy, it was actually the top level of a data strategy, essentially. But language-wise, digital North Star landed better, essentially. But this was really powerful because it basically just aligned people around the why. Like, why are we doing all this stuff? And all of a sudden, the roadmap went from like fairly crazy situation to something really refined, and we started delivering actual value aligned to what they're trying to do. So for example, we built a very cool Next Best Beer project that will be in bars next year, which is going to be very fun. So, but you know, that was just like top level of a strategy, not the rest, we'll do that later. That was just alignment, right? The other thing very often, you know, that is a really good thing to start with, I think, is data maturity. So what I've done over here is I've overlaid a bunch of results from some of the different data maturity assessments we've done over the last couple of years. So what you can see on the x-axis is like some of the different categories we measure about, so like culture, technology, governance, etc. And you can kind of see the spread of how people are doing essentially with different companies. This is a really good place to start, I think, sometimes, because it's relatively easy to do a data maturity assessment, and it can give people a sense of where they are starting from and probably what are the immediate hurdles in front of them. Like, if we try and do anything, we're going to trip over a governance problem or something else problem, right? So I think this is, you know, so very often I think that a good starting place is bits of a strategy, if not the full strategy. Okay, so I hope I have not upset anyone by coming into the data strategy theatre and advocating for don't go off and write a data strategy. But I just think that we need to, you know, it answers a specific question, but it's not often the question that's being asked, right? So I would say the data strategy is often not the answer that you're looking for. And the only way you can find the answer is by nailing the question. So ask good questions. What are the questions the organization are really trying to answer? And then structure the best way of answering those questions. And in particular, what I would do is urge you all the time to think about what is the conversation I would like to have my business stakeholders to have, and how can I enable that exact right conversation to happen? And I think that will help you get to a good point, a much better point than maybe just creating a data strategy and then it doesn't quite land and so on. So if you want to come and chat, argue, etc., I'll be on the stand by the AI and ML Ops booth. And if you want to come and hear about the BREWDOG story, or if you want to come and hear what we did about with the English Cricket Board, then please do come and have a chat. But in the meantime, I think we've got a couple of minutes for questions. If you want to ask a question, if you could put your hand up, then I think they bring a mic around, and I've got to put this on for this. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand.